started a world soccer show called Football Mundial, where we filmed in different countries of almost every week of the year. And I managed to find a way to be in South Africa with a South African team when the Mandela election was going on. So I followed them, filmed them voting, was part of that experience, which was incredibly uplifting.
If you love sports, and don't we all really love sports, you've met your match with Peter Hutton. His love of the game literally has taken him all over the world to positions like being CEO of Eurosport, head of sports at Facebook Meta. And today, well, I'll let him tell you what his life is like today. Peter Hutton, welcome to SmarterUmedia.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Nice for you to ask me.
I just have so many fun things to talk about, but we never wait. We're going to get you to CT, our chicken timer. So you get a chance to make me smarter today. And in the worlds that you've haunted for so many years, I can only imagine what's about to come. Peter Hutton, make me a little bit smarter.
Well, no surprise that I'll talk about sport because that's what I spend my life doing. But one of the things that I think people don't realize is understanding the power of sport and understanding where that power lies. And that power lies with the audience. People talk about big TV deals, big sponsorship deals, but it's fundamentally underpinned by, do people care? And if people care about your brand, your product, your team, your players, then you're in the right space. And that translates through to sort of how you should be publishing your content and how you think about that. Because as everyone who knows social media will tell you, authentic content is what matters. People telling you about what they care about. So therefore, sport has this huge potential for telling its stories through the people that care about the stories. And for my mind, that's the missed opportunity in that sport is often reliant, particularly the big old traditional sports, often reliant on the old broadcasters paying for things in the way that has grown the sports industry for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And now you need to change that equation and say individuals tell stories better on social media, not teams or leagues or corporate accounts. So how do you empower those individuals to tell the stories? If you do that, then you will unlock more passion, more sponsor value, more fundamental interest, because as every sports team or league knows, what matters is how do you get people to care? And unlocking the power of your fans will get other fans to care more.
You have 10 seconds left. I'm sure that all of the practice has worked itself out.
Oh, look, there's some background in being a radio reporter when I grew up. From like 16 onwards, I was a sports radio reporter. And you got told you're only allowed 30 seconds. So I became very used to speaking with like a ticking clock above my head going, okay, that's the score, stop talking.
That would be good for all of us. The first show that I sold in Hollyweird was with Norman Lear called The Big Pitch, where you were pitching big ideas to change the world. And my favorite one was the salary tabulator that would have people, while they were in a meeting, they would input the salaries of everyone in the meeting. And you would see this screen that was giving a total of how much money you were spending as the meeting went on.
One of the things that I learned from Meta, which was an amazing learning, was first of all, like begin and end all meetings on the half hour, and it became 25 minutes for a lot of it, because I'd just come out of a Parisian culture where meetings started with croissants and air kisses and a lot of coffee. And Meta suddenly turned me into this more disciplined, okay, if we're meeting at 9, we're meeting at 9 and we're out by 9:30. The ticking clock on the salary would have been a good factor there as well.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, you missed the croissant, didn't you? I mean, come on.
Very true. Very true.
I think it is so interesting now, today, in all media and everywhere around us, because information technology have transformed everything. So you say that you essentially have to be the conversation. It's less important how many people are watching your television show today. So if you're on whatever network and the NBA is broadcasting, it's more important that the grand conversation be about the NBA. Tell me more.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice framing of it, because I think the reality now is that the days where you all sat around one TV and shared your experience have gone. And we might be a bit, particularly at my age, sort of we're missing that, but it's the reality. So deal with it. And the answer, therefore, with a family or a community is understanding that everyone is consuming in a different way, often on different hardware, but certainly they're consuming as individuals. And therefore, the power is when they talk to each other and you build up that sense of authentic fandom that can carry you across generations, can carry you across demographics, across locations. And I think it's just a different way of seeing content that often people are comparing, okay, X amount of people watched this on a linear channel 10 years ago and X amount are watching today. It's a totally false comparison. The world has moved on. And while everyone is nostalgic from the period when they grew up, the reality is that behavior shifts and sporting viewership shifts with that. And I think it's maybe a wider than sport point, but that total conversation is what matters. How do you get people to care? And you get people to care in a much more complicated route these days.
Well, it's the cousin of the old thing. So when your father and you were heading around the UK going to see every sporting event, so that you were so passionate about it, by the time you were 16, you were finding a way to get into the business. In the pub where your dad would go, he'd be with all of his blokes and you'd be sitting around, and that was the equivalent of what the social media world is now. It's just sort of been replaced. So maybe not different, but different technology. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And I think that shared language that I grew up with, I grew up with a language of sport, the anecdotes, the heroes, the swearing, the whole sense of a community who cared about it. That's what really has shaped a lot of the things I've done ever since. I took a huge gamble when I was like 28 and moved out to India. And I was like, what the hell have I done? Like land in this strange country and I didn't really know the language and I'm lost. And then you meet people who've got cricket in common and you've got stories in common and it all comes together. And, that shared language sort of helped power my next journey. And I think, that's the reality that if you're part of a conversation, you feel more comfortable about where you are, and that shared language is a big advantage.
Well, you talked about the power of sport and you started there because I think it's rather remarkable in its good, bad, and indifferent ways, right? Because I think you've seen all of it. So let's start with the incredible power. Things like the NBA, which I am most familiar with. The commissioner is a law school buddy. And so watch what they do. NBA Africa, to me, is something that will help make a big difference in the world and in that continent. But that's using the power of sport. What other things sort of have you witnessed all along the line that take that power and do really remarkably good things with it?
Oh, look, I'll give you one example from Saudi. In the one of my roles at the moment, I sit on the board of the Saudi Soccer League. And,
Mm-hmm.
when that approach came in, I was initially a bit like, okay, do I really want to attach my name to Saudi? Do I want to go out there a lot? And a group of women talked to me and said, look, come to the women's football. And I came to a game and genuinely uplifting experience, in the you saw these young women that hadn't been allowed to play football a few years earlier, hadn't even been allowed to visit stadia a few years before that. And they created the first national Saudi Women's League. It's now 3 years in. It's grown every year. Every game is televised live. You've got young women who are empowered and are now telling their stories as successful sportswomen, and the government's behind them. You look at the administrators of a load of the sports in Saudi, you see women in positions of power. That's a huge change for the country. And it's been fascinating to be sort of be on the edge of that story and see them grow and see them take advantage of those new opportunities.
Well, you look at this country, you look at the United States, where we are, you're in San Francisco, I'm in Santa Fe, And the transformations that happen through sport here are examples of an incredible power. To see that happening in places like Saudi Arabia, what an extraordinary legacy that can be
Well, look, and
potentially.
I think, America clearly is the focus of some criticism around the world sometimes, but women's sport is a great legacy that the American sporting population has really driven in the rest of the world. You look at what's happening in India with the Indian women's cricket. You look at the growth of European women's soccer. Fundamentally, the stars of the 90s from that women's soccer team that the US sort of sent out to the world, those were images that were really powerful and have inspired people all over the world. So it's a great American legacy. Clearly women's sport is not owned by the US, but I think that women's soccer team really sent a message out about, these are stars at the top of their game with huge fan bases. And I think that message went out everywhere.
Part of that was legislative. I mean, Title IX here
Yeah.
in the United States was something that was consciously done at young levels, because you can't possibly be involved with sports and not understand that it starts when you're a kid in playing in a league, doing the thing. So when that was legislated that you couldn't just have sports for boys,
Mhm.
it changed things here. And then I think that reverberated, like you're talking about, all over the world.
Yeah, totally. And those instincts, it's amazing like the difference playing sport, even if you play it really badly, you understand what you're looking at a little bit more. You
Yeah.
get a sense of like how special the top end of the game is. So it's really important to look and touch and be part of that community. And also, you see kids growing up, the difference it makes to their confidence, the ability to blend in with people from different types of background and different types of character. I love that about sport. And watching like my own boys grow up and play soccer around the world has been great as they've made friends from different countries. And, the fact that they can go out there and kick a ball is a pretty basic thing, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah, because you need somebody to play. You need other people. And honestly, you care not a whit when you're a young kid and you're looking for somebody else to be on the court with you, on the pitch. It's just the
Yeah.
way it is. And I think that is a thing that I hope, carry forward with us in times when we seem to be in conflict with each other internally and externally. It's the thing that I hope can bind us. It's just we're people doing things on the playground together. That is something you don't forget.
Yeah, totally. Much agreed.
Going beneath the thing, where sport is at some, very basic level, a part of our inner culture. It helps us maybe take some of the aggression that we have generally in life and focus it in a different way. I know you were actually reporting at Hillsborough, which was one of the tragedies in sport that we can talk about, but explain for those who don't know what happened then, and you being right there and witnessing it, I'm sure shows other parts of what sport can bring.
Yeah, I mean, it was a remarkable day. I worked as a journalist basically sort of straight out of college. I'd done the radio commentary thing sort of all the way from 16 to 22, and then went full time a radio station straight out of university, and then went to the BBC as a news reporter. Um, and I got given this really easy gig of like, go to this massive game. All you have to do is do some interviews with the managers at the end of the game, but you get to go to the game. And I'm like, great, I'll be there. And I go to a ground that I know really well in Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. I used to live in Sheffield, used to go there as a fan, and it's a brilliant atmosphere. It's a hot, sunny day. Everyone's sort of sat outside, and you're like, what a massive game's going to be. Liverpool against Nottingham Forest. Um, and it's clearly packed in the stadium. And about 6 minutes into the game, one of the Liverpool players that makes a shot, it hits the crossbar, and the crowd surged forward at one end of the game, which was normal in that sort of point. You had everyone standing in stadia. And then you realize this wasn't normal, and that people were being crushed, and the fans sort of spilled over onto the pitch. The game gets stopped, and then gradually you get this sort of sense of like, this is awful. Bodies are being carried. They're using advertising hoardings as stretchers. Um, I'm sat in the main stand, sort of away from it, thinking this is horrific. And eventually I get down onto the pitch and find the camera crew there, and we're filming sort of all these bodies basically being carried out of the stands, young kids. An incredible thing to see. And British football learned a lot from the lessons of that day. And then for the next sort of 3 months, I worked as a journalist on the inquest, where the BBC, who I was working for then, had a big team at the inquest, but I was like the young, scruffy one that looked like a fan. So I'd get put outside to talk to the fans as they came in and gave evidence. And listening to their individual stories of that day was awful. But also quite cathartic to sort of understand what people had gone through. And it's definitely a day that stays with you, and sort of shapes your attitude to life, the police, to fan behaviour, to lots of things. But as a journalist, you clearly have a responsibility to tell the story, and the story really only came out properly years later. In the fans complained about the police tactics. The police clearly tried to make it the fans' fault. And it's taken a series of inquiries to come through that. So long answer to your question, but I think it was a complicated day that teaches you a lot.
Technology and sports. You've worked in traditional Eurosports broadcasting parts of the business, and you've watched technology as you headed to Meta. Technology changes us at the same time that we change technology. Tell me about how you feel like it's transformed the games, and at the same time transformed us and how we want to digest the games.
Oh, sport and technology is a story that goes a long way back, and
That's true.
you always see what things trigger changes, right? And sport
Yeah.
has that power to trigger changes. So you go back to 1966, and my dad goes to the Football World Cup final in London, and he said, at the time, all the adverts in the papers were buy your color TV so you can watch the World Cup final. Um, and sport has that ability that you want to upgrade your technology to watch the sport in the best way possible for you. And whether that was black and white to color, or terrestrial to satellite and cable, or SD to HD, the TV companies, the manufacturing companies have always used great sports events to try and take you on that journey. And the same is true now of the digital forms of watching the game, because I think sport actually hasn't changed that much in terms of the viewing experience sort of over the last 20 odd years. But now it has the potential to do that, because what is clear about human behavior now is that you tend not to sit back and watch something. You lean forward and you're pressing buttons and you're making choices while you're watching something. If you'd said to me 15 years ago, you're watching a movie and you'd go and search for information about the actor while you're watching the movie, you'd think like, that's just totally weird behavior. But now completely
Never. It's
normal.
never going to
Right?
happen.
And I think, that's true of certainly of watching sport, in that your way of watching evolves with the technology options around you. And as a result, it's always an interesting space to be in, because you can make that experience better. And making the choices using a bit of test and learn, to use some tech phraseology, is always fun.
Well, I feel also like we live in the time where technology is ubiquitous. It exists in our lives every moment, and there are an almost infinite number, it seems, of apps that want our time all the time. As a guy who put poker on the map and made it into a sport that wants your time, I understand all too well what that means for humans. But I think that's something we don't talk about that much. We don't
Yeah, I think
really
it's a
have
good
a
point,
lot,
Steve. Yeah,
and I think we
and
should be.
yeah, it's fascinating to see the implications that has on sport as well, right? Because it used to be, second weekend in June, it was the start of Wimbledon, and 4th of April or that week was always the boat race. And you had like a calendar of events, and different sports were at different places on that calendar. And they all had their window, and they sort of coexisted in that way. But then, as the ability to consume content about that sport grew and grew, actually you end up really immersing yourself in the thing that you care about most.
Hmm.
So the growth and growth of the NFL, the growth of the Premier League, of Indian cricket, all fits that in that it's not necessarily a X amount of days of the year or X amount of hours of the year. It's all the time. It's 24/7. There is always more information out there that you can dive into. Um, I support an English football team, which is not very glamorous, called Derby County. And, now I can see their under 18s and their under 21s. And I look at like the kids coming through, and their injury stories are like permanently sort of center stage for me. So you can really immerse yourself. And it's almost a contrast of, you think that your ability to source content is boundless, but actually you go more and more into certain things. You look at the stats in terms of the number of apps on a phone, and actually it's not that many that get used. You just tend to go back more and more to the things that you really care about. And that has implications for the economy of sport as well, because one of the things that always makes me laugh is when you see a proposal for a new league or a new organization. They're like, all we need is 1% of the NFL's airtime, and we'll get the NFL budget 1%. And it's like, no, that's not really the way it works. So you've got this
That's
concentration of power behind the sort of big things that really dominate conversation.
Yeah, but those dreams are how things happen that shouldn't happen. I mean,
Mm.
but somehow you're absolutely right. And the hockey stick, that's my other favorite thing with business plans. Like, yes, we've been losing money for 4 years, but as soon as we get your money, we're going to do this. And so, yes, I'm with you 100%. Sticky is the word that we always used, which
Yeah.
was things are stickier than we think. And that goes to whatever it is we're used to using. Man, it's easier to use it. And everybody misunderestimates, as George W. Bush would say, what that actually means. And so I agree that that is the case. As you're working with the Saudi league and starting to press in to there, certainly no problem with resources, right? I mean, that's what is driving some of that.
Oh,
What
we're
is the
still working
landscape
to a
like?
budget. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you do. It's infinite money except when budget time comes. But how does that fit in? I mean, so into the landscape, these established leagues that are
Mm.
now seeing competition because people like the sport, and the notion is that if you can have a true alternative, that competition is good, even in sports.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and soccer's a very good way of telling the story, right? Because you've got
Yeah,
MLS and the Saudi League, both of whom have invested quite heavily in bringing a different level of player into a game. Saudi League's been running 50, 60 years now. It is an old traditional league with old rivalries, and that's one of its strengths. Um, but certainly post the acquisition of Cristiano Ronaldo 3 or so years ago now, um, it's now got a visibility around the world that it never had before. But
right.
the old sports that you grew up with, the old leagues you grew up with, like the Premier League for most of the world, are sticky. And, if your
Yeah,
dad was a Liverpool fan and you're a Liverpool fan, trying to convince someone to watch Al Nasser in Saudi, that's quite a challenge. The plus point in terms of change is that social media is clearly heavily about individuals.
right.
So Ronaldo as one individual signing, or Messi as one individual signing for MLS, that takes a lot of eyeballs with them. Um, and that sort of creates that potential for change. But you're right. You're fighting incumbents who will not give up their space easily, and there is not infinite attention time. You need to claim some time that was previously going somewhere else.
Yes. And for humans, it's a really good thing if we're not always on the device all the time. I mean, that's the other human piece of this, right? As the world
Mm.
expands and everybody wants that time, and there is a need for humans to not do that sometimes, to be whole individuals, to spend time with our family that's not focused on the thing that someone's trying to sell us something. And that's part of what we in the media business, I hope, are working on to make sure that we're not just trying to drive you one more moment to do one more thing and buy one more thing. We want you to be whole.
Yeah, it's why I love the purity of running or swimming, right? You just focused on the act, and even
Yeah.
though podcasts and headphones occasionally get in the way, you've got a little bit more purity of moment about it, which is really important. One of the things that I've loved in the sports industry this last year has been looking at people's behavior in stadia. And I'm chairman at Wembley Stadium in the UK, and obviously go to a lot of US stadia and watch how people operate. And one of the things that I think as a sports organizer you want people to be eyes up and feeling immersed in the event, because then they have a better experience, a better moment. And one of the most depressing things is seeing everyone head down in their phones while the event is going on,
Yeah.
because they might have headed to their phone to find out some stats about the game, but then you see a WhatsApp from your grandma and you've off down a rabbit hole, and you've lost the emotional impact. So one of the things that we're talking about at Wembley is trying to learn from the American stadia and have like big screens that's giving you multiple stories and loads of data and lots of ways of keeping you immersed in the event. And I think
Right.
that's an interesting battle now for sports organizers who are bringing fans to an event, is actually making the event immersive enough that they lose themselves in it. You always used to talk about cinema and that sense of you walk into the cinema and you come out and you're like, how the hell is it dark? Like I've completely lost all sense of where I've been and what I've been doing for 2 hours. And a great sports event should be like that. You should go in and just lose yourself in the event. So you've also got to battle against the phones and the other technology interrupting you while you're there and trying to enjoy what you've got.
And the great ones are good at that. I mean, really so good at that now.
Mm.
You don't have a moment where you're sitting wondering what to do with yourself at an NBA game. I went to the biggest rodeo, the NRA, this year in Vegas.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the show was fantastic. And they don't really let you, if you want, in the in between times, you can go get something to eat or whatever, but there's something for your mind to be doing all the time.
Mm.
So yes, we're going to get to Wembley and all of the fabulous things that you get to do. One of my favorite discussions with anyone that was going to come on Smarter You was when you and I talked, and you said that your life now, you made sure that you had the ability to still get those great tickets that you were able to get in all those other worlds. So I'm going to get to that. I know usually you probably start out with people saying, tell me your life story, but you're too interesting for that. So we're talking industry. We're going to get to your life story very soon because it's great too. One of the things that you sent to me was talking about lookalike audiences. And
Mm.
that's a term that it is new to me, but I love it. So describe your sort of understanding of lookalike audience, what Meta does, and what we ought to be thinking as sports people.
One of the things that I left a very big and lovely and nice organization in Eurosport and went to Meta, and I had a couple of thousand people working for me at Eurosport, and I went to Meta and I got one, and I got put on a training course with the assistant chef from the London office because he had one as well. Um,
Okay.
and I went through a huge learning period, and particularly learning from the young guys and women around me who
Yeah.
really had lived social media more than I'd ever done.
Yeah.
And then you sort of gradually look at the business model and why people are spending on social. And one of the big things that an advertiser would do is they'd see a brand, see a supporter of that brand one way or the other, and then advertise to go to the lookalikes who behaved a little bit like the person who liked the brand because they're the logical next people to bring in. So you're always looking at that funnel of like-minded audiences. Um, and, to me, that had really interesting implications for sport because, again, as you try and grow a sport or grow a team, it's actually friends and family of existing fans is the logical place to start
Right.
because you're building a connection. One of the sports that I love working with is professional triathlon. And there's so
Okay.
many big races all over the world. Um, Now, thankfully, under this PTO, Professional Triathletes Organization umbrella. But the key challenge is like, okay, how do you make people aware of the big races, how they sign up, and bring them into that organizational funnel? And the actual people who are doing the sport already are the key to that because if you're a mass participation runner, then you want to tell your story and you inspire the people around you to go and do the same thing. So I love that idea that authentic personal content in sport preaches to that same lookalike audience that an advertiser on Meta is often looking at. But you can do that without spending the money on advertising. You can do it by encouraging your advocates, your fans, your participants to tell their own stories.
It's like the old adage in politics, you want a big tent. And so when you're you're looking at your core fan, there used to be lots of places they would go in the outside world. Now with
Mm.
technology, all of that stuff is at an exponential scale so that when they are talking to their people, and that can be a small Facebook group, that can be their family within those places, or it can be an actual audience. You want them creating content, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
want them to do what you and I are doing. Essentially, our passion here at SmarterUmedia is entrepreneurship. We think everybody has an inner entrepreneur. We'd like to give that life. That's what we do. But people who want entrepreneurs to flourish want us to do that because that helps spread the word. That's what
yeah,
you're talking about, right?
yeah, totally. That, yeah, and well put. I think that it's that idea of let people tell their story. It's so powerful. I think that's at the core of why social media works so well, right? And
Yeah.
whether that be a 30-second TikTok to music, it's letting people tell the story that engages people around them. And you see someone or something that you recognize, you're attracted in. You use the politics example. I'd say it's the similar to in the old days when I was growing up. We used to go door to door, sort of canvassing for local politicians. And if you saw a house with a dog, you'd be like, okay, you got a dog. You go to that house, and then you can talk dog, and then that'll widen it up. You go and bang on the door and say, here's a completely new concept I want to sell to you. You get nowhere, right? You've got to find some connection point. You've got to open up a natural conversation.
Well, I just think that's insightful. And again, you having come from Eurosport, now you're at Meta, Facebook, then, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with your one person in your department, and to learn something like that, the lookalike audience, which is a way to describe things that I've understood but never known how to put a label on them. I think that's useful and helpful. Your uh, yeah, your life. We're going to get to your life now. I mean, it's now time. All right, Peter. We haven't exhausted even a bit of it, but we're going to get to what I think is an amazing story. You loved sport. You went with your dad. Tell me about that. How that led to your experience at the age of 16.
Oh, so I was very lucky in that I had a sports obsessed dad. Really grew up with him on his own. Um, but that sort of took me all over the place, watching all sorts of different sports events. And my dad was also a frustrated journalist. He worked as a sales guy, insurance sales guy, but he'd sort of grown up wanting to be a journalist when he was younger. So he was always, doing match reports, collating stats. We'd sit in the car, and this is going to sound very odd now, but felt completely natural as a kid. You'd do sports quizzes sort of on long journeys to games. So my sports knowledge was unbelievable growing up, sort of thanks to him. And then, clearly had grown up listening to radio on these long journeys, sort of as we traveled around the country. And as a result, I got 2 weeks work experience when I was at school as a 16-year-old. And basically you had to go follow someone round in an office and make coffee for them somewhere in Leeds, where I was at the time.
Right.
And I managed to get the local radio sports guy, and I was following around for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, he said, "Look, you clearly, you know this space. Do you want to report on a game?" And he gave me a game which had a crowd of about 15 people, and I was reporting from a telephone box that might need translating for the younger audiences, and literally did it twice and came away and was like quite excited with myself. And he said, "Well, do you want to keep doing it every week?" So I just kept doing it. And then gradually schoolwork got less and less important and radio work got more and more important. And even though I went away to university, I spent most of my time at university working as a sports reporter and commentator, and then became full-time when I came out the other end, and really never did a proper job. There's been occasions where people have tried to make me do non-sports jobs, and it's always fallen apart. And
Never
I've
been a
always
good idea.
reverted back to sport.
Well, people talk about passion and how it's great when you can wake up and you're doing the thing that you're passionate about. I think you missed a very important lead. You buried, Mr. Journalist, the important lead when your school had this program where you could go and be with someone for 2 weeks. You actually asked to do something sports.
Oh, yeah. I was never going to do a proper job.
That's a piece of the equation. I feel like it's a total piece of the equation, just because that may not have been on the list of things that they would be able to go to. But
No,
I feel like you
it wasn't your normal
specifically
job,
said,
I'll give you that.
"Can I do this?" And it's
Yeah.
amazing how many of us sit back and we don't step up and say, "Here's what I want to do." And this was a transformative moment in your life.
Yeah. And I think, it's easy to sort of look back on a very long career now and go, yes, I was planned going this way and this way and this way. It wasn't always
No.
planned, but gradually it became more and more about following instincts that said this is where the opportunity is. And you look at my career, and there's a repeated pattern of giving up sensible job, jumping off a cliff, going doing something crazy. But they all basically worked out. And I think was really helpful in terms of learning about stuff. That jump between Eurosport and Meta was a massive learning jump, but so was moving to India, so was moving to Dubai. That there was a few jumps along the way.
You have had the things work out. That's why you get to hear the stories where it works out. We understand it doesn't always.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, wherever you were going to go, I bet it would have been good places. I mean, you say schoolwork became less important, but you wound up at the University of Cambridge. So it's not as if somehow you didn't find an education, right? The education has helped you for the rest of your life.
I mean, I did concentrate on medieval drama for my dissertation, so I'm not sure exactly how much the precise work has helped me, but certainly the experience of being there and the community helped me.
I think you're being very dramatic, and that must have come from your degree. A little medieval drama, I see, Peter. A little medieval drama. You go to most people's LinkedIn world, and it tends to be, here's my resume. Here's the thing that I've done. Aren't I so important? You literally list extraordinary moments that you've been able to experience because of your sports journey.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you just go through them if you want, but I'm just going to start with the first one you put is you were there when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah. And bizarrely, as a kid, I'd been to East Berlin. I'd studied German at school. I sort of went to communist Germany at the point. And then because I spoke decent German, I ended up getting sent out there for a few stories and was just around while it happened. Um, and did a really interesting series in East Germany with some of the sort of state coaches that had been part of that East German state system that were then lost, right? Because there wasn't the big state funding there had been before. So you got to see, the personal effects of that change. And it wasn't all inspiring and uplifting. A lot of people had their lives turned over. Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
to see the reality of that was fascinating. But again, I was there thanks to sport. That I've sort of, again, I would genuinely say been really lucky in that I managed to be at places when stuff happened. So I went to I started a world soccer show called Football Mundial, where we filmed in different countries of almost every week of the year. Um, and I managed to find a way to be in South Africa with a South African team when the Mandela election was going on. So I
Yeah.
followed them, filmed them voting, was part of that
Wow.
experience, which was an incredibly uplifting because South African soccer was largely a black sport. I think the team that we're following at the time, Mamelodi Sundowns, had 2 white players, 9 black players, but it was a properly integrated sport, whereas rugby and cricket had traditionally been white sports. So to sort of
Right.
see the change through their eyes was a real honor in many ways. I lived in Hong Kong when Britain and China sort of handed over the territory back to China.
Wow.
So fascinating period to be in Hong Kong, which sort of felt a bit like sort of end of the empire type period against this incredibly dramatic Hong Kong background. To be in India through the privatization and the arrival of foreign money into India, I think again was a transformative period. To be in Dubai as it came up from being this sort of small place in the desert and suddenly just became like a metropolis was staggering.
Yeah.
I tell the story. We started a sports channel there, and I had a building which had a beautiful view of like the sea and the sand. And then they built the Palm Island outside the window. So I watched that all come up. And then the end of the story is that another tower block got put up between me and the sea, and that was the sign to go. But it sort of summed up that every little bit of real estate in Dubai was being covered by concrete. So again, fascinating periods, really interesting times. And while I'm happy to sort of paint myself as a sports obsessive, um, it's been amazing to see those different cultures from the inside and to
Right.
be on a journey around all those different places.
Well, you never see your world the same when you go back. You literally don't have the same world. In a way, my experience is you go back a little bit an interloper to your own culture, and at the same time, you just see things broader. Your vision does this instead of this. Oh, may we do that as long as we possibly can.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, right? Because and my family give me stick for this because I go back to England and I'm like Mr. Small World. I'm like local football team, local rugby league team.
Yeah.
That takes me back to where I was growing up from. Um,
Yeah.
but you're right in that you're not exactly the same person that you were when you left.
In places with people, we realize we're all people and we all have good stuff. We all have bad stuff. There are good people, bad people around us. It's all of those things. Entrepreneurship. So, SmarterUmedia is really about people who tap in. I think of you as what we in the academic world call an entrepreneur. You are not necessarily someone who has gone out and started a company, but quite literally, your passions and the like have allowed you to find great companies that have been built and be extraordinarily entrepreneurial within them. And it's that sort of energy that carries companies into multi generational companies. That is an experience you seem to have mastered very well. Have you ever had a desire to start your thing?
Well, we sort of did it in Dubai. I have to say, I was about like the 10th or 12th person in, so I wasn't
Okay.
quite the founder, but I
Okay.
arrived before we launched on air, so I'll claim a startup sort of story there.
Okay.
And that was an amazing story in that there was a guy called Chris McDonald, who's an American guy that had worked in Asia for a while, and he came up with this idea of competing and competing in a way that made no logical sense. In the Asian sports TV was dominated by ESPN and by News Corp, and the
Right.
two of them merged. I have to say, I was one of the reasons they merged because I forced the prices up between the two of them. But regardless, they
Okay.
merged, and they were like, "Now we've merged, we dominate the market, we can control the pricing, it's ours." And Chris had worked at ESPN, and he came out of it, and he was like, "No, there's an opportunity here." And he
Yeah.
put together this sort of dirty dozen of people from all over the place that brought different skills to the table. And we started this channel called 10 Sports. And the first week that we launched, and remember, I've just got married in India. I've persuaded my Indian wife to move with me to Dubai. Her family are like looking at us going, "What the hell are you doing?" The Times of India ran a poll that said, "Will 10 Sports still exist in 2 months' time?" And like 95% of the people said no. Like, what the hell are they doing?
95%, so you
And
know you can't lose. You know you're going to win.
certain things force your resolve, right? And this channel, was a start. We got $2 million of startup capital. We set up against News Corp and ESPN joint venture, and within 2 years, more people are watching us than them, and we're
Wow.
profitable, and we sell 8 years later. Huge credit to Chris, to Abdurrahman Bukati, who was the Arab local who founded it and funded it to start with, and a guy called Zahid Nirani, who was like the guru of the cricket space. And we created this group of people, and there was like 100 people work there. And again, our competitor had like 1,000. Right? But that startup energy was brilliant. There was a load of social media posts, which is why I'm quite so emotional about it at the moment, saying it was its 24th anniversary
Wow.
this week on the 1st of April. We launched on the 1st of April because it was a
Wow.
joke. Um, and it went really
I
well.
love
And,
that. I love
so
that.
I
April
love that.
1st. Don't forget
Yeah,
April 1st. Yep. Yep.
brilliant.
Okay.
So I really liked that startup energy. And a series of times in my life, I've sort of been lucky to be at places where either it was a startup or it was a big acceleration of energy, so it felt like a startup.
Right.
And that is a really intoxicating sort of feeling. And you make mistakes, and things go wrong, but to leave a legacy that something is better than when you arrived there is a great legacy.
Sport is one of those places where the number of satellite businesses is as big as any other marketplace. World Poker Tour is an example. We said it was a sport, so it must have been a sport, right? So we took poker and we became the league, did all of that. The real money was made by the people who found ways to monetize that in markets across the world. So
Yeah.
whether that was an online site or whether that was someone who had a poker magazine that now could get all kinds of new revenues. How do you see that marketplace today? With new sports coming in, are those opportunities greater or tighter? How saturated or open do you think the markets are for people to create their satellite worlds?
Um, it's a really good question. I still think there's loads of opportunities. They're not necessarily the same opportunities that the business plans often write. The opportunities emerge, right?
Yeah.
And again, one of the learnings from Meta was test and learn.
Yeah.
Just and test and learn is like an alien philosophy for sport, right? In that you have one product, everyone takes it or they don't take it, and you're
Yeah.
like, actually, if we do it in this way in that place and that way in that place, then we might learn what the better option of those two things are. But so I still think there's great opportunities. I think sport just cuts through it. It drives technical change. It inspires community. And I think the sports industry often only take a percentage of the spend that comes around the sporting moment. People tend to focus in on broadcast and sponsorship as the two traditional sort of gods of the sports industry. But
Right.
actually, there's so much more. You look at, we just run a promotion in rugby league in the UK about like buy your train ticket and your match ticket together. About there's a firm that I really like who where you win loyalty points for your football club by spending in the shops around the stadium. So there's so many other ways of plugging into spend that the sports industry often hasn't looked at because the growth of satellite TV revenue over the last 30 years has been so easy. You
Yeah.
didn't need to look as much, but I still think there's loads of opportunity there, and I still remain sort of very bullish about the industry. It's maybe a slightly different industry to the way it was.
And I love your Dubai story because the 100 versus 1,000 is the way all great startups work, right? I mean, it's the, oh, you'll never get them. That's how the David and Goliath story gets told so often in entrepreneurship circles and all of those things. So I also just echo that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity.
I think one of the things that I love about being in a business is when you actually understand what everyone does in that business,
Yeah.
and learning from the bottom up in that way. Um, and you get to a big business, particularly as has happened to me, you get parachuted into a big business. You're starting at the wrong point, right? Because you're looking sort of top down, thinking, well, okay, that's what I think he does, and that's why I think he does it. But you never really understand it from bottom up. Whereas if you're there as the first 10 employees and first 20 employees and see it grow, you just have an instinctive understanding for the business that is just so much better.
Nobody cares about it or will be able to do it as well as you do because you care. It's your thing. It's your baby. That's absolutely for sure. What do you think about sports betting in sports?
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple story, right? Because you see
Sure.
the personal damage that can happen on sports betting, but at the same time, there's something that's instinctively there that is going to happen whether you legalize it or don't legalize it. So you're probably better to legalize it. And sport around the world has been hugely fueled by organized, licensed sports betting. Fascinating to see it happen in the US. Makes me smile occasionally that people sometimes talk about it like it's like this completely new concept. You're like, really? And I love the discussion at the moment about like prediction markets and sports betting and whether it's completely different. I'm like, it doesn't feel that different to me. But so the way that they're legislated in completely different ways is fascinating.
Well, we'll see. I mean, that's one of those things. The United States doesn't seem to legislate anything anymore. So that's how the prediction market guys seem to be pretty bullish about where they sit. I actually consulted with the NBA for a year. So when they came out against PASPA, when New Jersey was moving again to say, you can't keep us from doing sports betting, the league came out with all the other leagues saying we're against it, integrity of the game, and PASPA. And I had this lovely dialogue with the then deputy commissioner saying that's kind of this argument. You have to be saying that you think the Constitution allows Florida to grow oranges and not California, which is under the Commerce Clause. No question, that's not constitutional. But beyond that, you're saying the integrity of the game is better guarded by criminals or
Mm.
online international sites that have no regulation. And that just can't be the case. And after that year, the board agreed and he published the New York Times op ed piece. And I think that was one of those catalyzing moments. You touch the glass, and all of a sudden the United States changed because he said, we're open to regulated markets. We just have to do it right. And so I think it's happening so fast here that it's almost tough to keep up with. But like you said, it's been around in so many other markets, and it not only the world hasn't ended, people's fan engagement and their healthy ways of engaging with sports betting seems to be fine.
That's fascinating, though, to be right in the middle of that conversation at what is clearly a landmark judgment. Must have been great to be part of it.
Oh, well, yeah. And again, as the poker guy, the being able to sort of come from the understanding that we had had as we were so challenged in our poker market because the two sites after this law came out, UEGov, after a law came out saying that you couldn't process bank transactions, sort of stopping the online market, there were two sites that said, we're going to still take your money. They were each making $5 million a day in a very high margin business. Well, that's not fun to compete against, right? And so we had to figure out how to change our models and business to deal with that because the government didn't rush to our aid. They weren't
Yeah.
worried about the World Poker Tour. And so when you looked at sports, same sort of thing. When I did the white paper that I wrote for the NBA, there were an estimate of $600 billion being wagered in the United States for, illegal betting. So it's not as if it's not happening. The market's there. And essentially what you're doing is just not having any regulations so you can find out when people are doing nefarious things.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I've loved watching some of the investigations into match fixing, where they look at the shifts in the market, and that flags the warning sign. And really good example of where betting can actually help sort of the legitimate sports industry. As I say, I think anyone who touches the industry also is worried about the implications and the social good elements of the story, but it's not simple, right? And you can definitely learn from watching how the industry works.
Well, I think I could talk to you for 3 or 4 days. That would probably not fit into your schedule, probably would not fit into mine. But it's just been great, Peter, to dive in a little bit to where sports been, where it is. Anything else before we get to our information segment that you just sort of want to throw in that's come up in our discussion that you want to dive into a little bit before we go?
It's been great, and I'm now sort of addicted into you, Smart. So I will be seeing lots more of you going forward.
Well, I love that. So we end by asking you a better way to curate our information. It's an information age. You've been in the middle of all of those things. Is there some source that you rely on, either in sports or in other parts of your life, that you think that's a really great place for me to get good information that I can benefit from?
It's a really good question because I don't think there is an answer. I think there's always a new answer. There's always a new book. There's always a new technology story. There's always a new door opening. There's always a new person to talk to. And if I was reliant on one route, I'd be going down the wrong route.
Yes, never rely on one route. What's a great sports book? What's one that you go back to and read more than once?
Oh, honestly, like you look behind me, these are all sports books, right? So
Okay,
that's a
got
very
it.
dangerous question. That if you want an American example, something like A Fan's Life by Exley. If you wanted a British example, something like Only a Game by Eamon Dunphy, which was the story of being a pro soccer player. Um, but I have a whole load of these and a couple more bookcases out of sight that could give you different answers.
That's fantastic. Peter Hutton, thanks for coming on Smarter You Media. Come back. It's been great to have you. Look forward to more.
Brilliant. And hopefully see you in person soon, Steve. Take care.